All right, well, it is about 2 minutes after, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. I think we still have some more people who are joining, but we will go ahead and get started. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Marketing and Sales in 2021, the path to rebuilding and sustaining Census. My name is Lisa Puri. I'm one of the principals of Love & Company, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we begin, I'm just going to cover a few logistics. Our plan is to cover our presentation points in about an hour or so, which will allow ample time to answer questions at the end. And so you may begin at any point through the presentation, submit questions via the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel. So here you can see where you can type your question. When you hit send, it'll then pop up into the question box. And then at the end, we'll be able to go in and you can, address your question to specific panelists, or, as we will all kind of, share the answers to the questions as we go. And I know a common question we do receive is, will we be able to share a recording of this presentation? Absolutely. Everyone who's registered for the webinar will receive the link to the recording. All right, so, that's where your question goes. All right, so our plan for today, I'm going to take a moment here in a second to introduce our panelists, but then I'm going to spend some time setting the stage. What are the highlights? What are the things that we've learned from 2020? And then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues who will take us through topics about what our consumers are thinking today and the marketing, messaging, and sales strategies that we may use to reach them and to entice them to take action. And then, as I mentioned, we will wrap up with a question and answer period. So once again, my name is Lisa Puri. I am, somebody is.
That's me. Sorry.
Stop touching, stop touching. Okay. So once again, my name is Lisa Puri, and hopefully nobody is seeing me freeze. I am a little bit, but I'm one of the principals of Love & Company and the Chief Client Services Officer. And Amy, if I can turn it over to you.
Sure. I'm Amy Brody. I'm VP of Client Services. I'm excited to share some great information with everybody today.
I'm Jim Gentry, the Copy Director, and glad to be here. Thank you.
I'm Joan Kelly Kincaid, and I'm a Senior Sales Advisor with Love, and I'm excited to speak with you today.
And I'm Karen Adams, Vice President of Market Intelligence, and the quick finger on the trigger there for a minute.
All right. Well, I am very excited to be joined by everyone here, and I'll tell you, every time I talk to my colleagues here, I certainly learn something new or think of something new. So we're going to just spend a couple minutes before we jump into hearing from each of them. I don't believe a single community in the country was not impacted by the effects of the COVID pandemic in 2020. While some communities did begin to rebound in the third and fourth quarters, others are still struggling to rebuild Census. And regardless of where you are on the path to rebuild Census, all communities need to have a solid plan to address the next phases of the pandemic. The vaccine rollout, certainly, and hopefully a post-COVID marketplace, which still may look very different than the normal that we remember. So as we start this new year, we're asking ourselves, what additional changes to the senior living marketing environment will this year bring? And what do communities need to do in order to continue to evolve their marketing and sales programs? Well, to look forward, we need to take a moment to look back. What are some of the key things that we learned in 2020? Well, first of all, our consumers and our associates have leapt up the learning curve in the use of video conference technology. Karen is going to talk about the consumer's mindset, but I want to take a moment to highlight a key point from our market intelligence team's research. If they weren't using applications such as Zoom before the pandemic, an incredible proportion of our consumers began using it once they began to stay at home, and more would like to. And we're absolutely seeing that play out in the communities that we are working with. Additionally, sales teams are making sales during the pandemic, and that includes blue sky, major expansion, and yes, even existing communities. So I'm just going to take a moment just to share some examples of that. The Baldwin is a blue sky community in New Hampshire. They had the interesting timing of launching the priority deposit program in mid-April 2020. So immediately the Welcome Center was closed. The sales staff were working from home. They had no in-person events or appointments all the way through June. We turned to digital and direct mail lead generation, and we were able to fill virtual events. The sales team was able to pivot and move to holding virtual appointments and connecting with people that way. We had great webinar attendance, and people were making deposits during the event and also following the events. And in the fall, we moved to the conversion to the 10%, and they have 36 deposits to date. So definite interest and moving forward with that project. Similarly, Pennyburn is a community in North Carolina. They are doing an expansion. And what's interesting here is not only have they had great success, they started their 10% pre-sales conversion the first week of March, immediately had to move to doing all those conversion appointments virtually, but not only did they achieve their pre-sales target in record time and have the expansion just about 80% reserved, they also have been successful in maintaining a very strong occupancy in their existing community. And then the final example I want to share here is John Knox Village. They're in Pompano Beach, Florida, very large single site life plan community. And they are also in a priority stage of an expansion, but one of their key focuses is the existing community. What's exciting is that their key performance indicators, they stayed on pace with their 2019 results, achieved a significant volume of leads, made a significant number of appointments, many of which were conducted virtually, and they've ended 2020 at 91% occupancy, and were really able to pivot their marketing program and take advantage of new and expanded platforms in order to be able to do that. So just I'm going to move on to our panelists here, but just some key highlights here. Our audience is online and using digital tools more than ever before. It's I think one of the the few bright spots out of 2020. As a result, the senior living sales cycle is very circular. We used to talk about it being very linear. There's a lot of different entry points, and we need to recognize that and capitalize on it with things like marketing automation, using content to really nurture your leads effectively. And that lead capture and that speed to connecting with the lead is so critical. And one of the things that you'll hear as we go through, and Joan will speak to, is we've really got to get back to basics and go with some of those tried and true best practices, and those become more important now than ever. So thank you for allowing me to set the stage a little bit. Karen, I'd like to turn it over to you to go ahead and talk to us about what are consumers thinking.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. So just by way of thank you for being here, is that one of the things I miss the most these days is that ancient ritual we used to have of getting together for a lot of these presentations. So I really miss seeing you all. And the second thing is that I think I must be a lot like Barack Obama, because one of the things I miss the most is hugging the colleagues that I've known for a really long time. So, but we soldier on, and we'll move ahead. Except my system's going to give me a problem. Lise, could you forward that?
Sure.
Thanks.
Are you good?
Yeah, and I'll try it again in a minute. So just some quick background on the data we're going to talk about here, and I want to move through it pretty quickly, so do know that you'll get those slides to be able to look more closely. These data are developed from 2 surveys that Love & Company developed immediately as the whole stay-at-home started to emerge. And one was really focused on measuring the strength of wait lists and depositors for projects that were in development and in process. And the second was for leads. And that survey was really focused on generating responses from people to raise their hands to want to be contacted for supporting sales teams. Many of the questions cross-cut the two surveys, and we've combined some of those here. So this is really transparency about what the data are, and that they aren't a scientific study. They really give us directional data. We have about 1,200, just north of 1,200 respondents in this database for the discussion today. Definitions are really important as you see these data. So wait list, when we use it here, are people who made a 10% deposit and selected a residence. So they were really strong moving ahead, new residences that would be open like in the coming year. They were really on tap to move in. The second group is depositors. And this group has $1,000 deposits or similar. We found that list types varied a great deal among providers. And the third group is leads, individuals with no financial commitment, but probably some contact or definitely some contact with the communities. So I'm going to need you on that lease, because as much practice as I had doing a session yesterday, this is giving me a problem today.
I can't guarantee it's not maybe my internet connection, but hopefully it's not. So you should be on the next slide. Do you see that?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to take the liberty of running through these insights really quickly, because they're basically insights from the data you're going to see. Depositors with 10% invested retain a very strong commitment to their decision. And actually, it's the wait list, people who have a 10% deposit down retain a very strong commitment. These are the people who had selected a unit. Among the less committed leads, there's greater decline in the likelihood to move before the pandemic and after the pandemic, but there's also a greater rate of non-response, which suggests unsureness. Healthcare does not appear to be the monster under the bed for prospects, leads, who are familiar with life plan communities for which the surveys were administered. So general rules may not apply to individual communities. And so you need to consider your own community, because there's variation between the samples. Prospects have observed the housing markets and the economy, and they're not feeling terribly threatened by those, but the continued spread of the virus is a concern for them. And the prospects are not necessarily totally sold on the idea that staying in their own homes is ideal. So those are some of the data that we'll share in these. At least forward that for me.
Sure.
And then the last major insight that really stands out to me and is very important is that all markets are local, always. And so I give you spreads and differences in the data because you can see how the samples vary in their response. Okay, so there's not a mass exodus from the market. These sample data give us the percentages of people who said they would move before the pandemic and the percentages after. The 4 samples show us the leads, and then we have the total leads, and then we have the depositors, and you can see how their interest both before and after jump up, and you can see the spreads for before and after. So while there does seem to be some decline, again, the issue is that it's not a mass exodus. Okay. Second thing is concerns, and again, it's the spread of the pandemic that seems to be the major issue. And again, the range in the right column gives you the differences in different samples. So again, the fact that markets are very, very local is clearly demonstrated here, and you kind of have to be aware of where your market is on this. But again, it's the continuing spread of the virus that's the concern. People have observed housing markets on fire, an economy that's held. These obviously can change as we move into the future. Healthcare on site remains important. In this question, we ask, is access to healthcare services on site more important, about the same, or less important to you following the stay-at-home experience? And we can see that among our depositors, there's high rates who say it's more important. I think the big concerns obviously come out of all of the press around nursing homes And in fact, most people who have been in touch, even if they're just leads for our communities, have had some contact. And so I think there's a strong realization, particularly of how life plan communities work, oftentimes not necessarily having to go to the skilled nursing level. So this may not be the monster under the bed for our life plan communities like it is being portrayed for straight up nursing communities. Again, the rates of being more important before for leads is lower. And so, you know, they do have a little bit different response, but still over 33% of them feel that that's more important. Staying home is more appealing than prior to the pandemic for about a third of respondents. But again, we can see some people for whom it's actually less important. And the main category into which people fell in this is really, it's about the same. You know, I think we have people who've been through a lot in their life and they're not jumping at things. They're resilient, they're wait and see. So I think that depositors and wait lists come in with a much stronger, stable commitment, and the leads are perhaps in a much more wait and see attitude or posture. Okay, next one for me. And finally, the last two slides will give us the level of commitment. The level of commitment makes a difference. So the bars on these show us each of the groups. They're the leads and the depositors and the wait list. And these sort of are in ascending importance. These are sort of in ascending importance I'm sorry. So these show us the community lifestyle characteristics that are more important to people now than before the stay-at-home experience. And we can see how fitness on site is tending to be the things that are more important, dining program. But it's the next slide that I think was really important. And again, the opportunity to view these when you get them later. You can look at the data more closely, but here we have knowing the source of healthcare services, staff available to check on my well-being, and access to healthcare on site. These are the rates for which people said these are more important than they were before. And again, if you look at the wait list, our most committed group, they're very high in valuing that component of the retirement community lifestyle. And last but not least, one of the most important things I think that we retain in our value proposition is community. So we asked the question in evaluating your likelihood to join a community with whom you share common interests, is it more important, about the same, or less important to you than it was prior to the stay-at-home experience? And again, in our samples, we can see that it's more important to many people. The main response category is it's about the same. So again, the data are directional for us to give us a sense of where people are, how people are feeling during this experience. And in fact, when they've had contact with us, even if it has been just that having visited, having brochures and having information, they're more stable than I think we've anticipated. So I hope those are helpful, at least in gaining a sense of stability going forward. We do have to reassure people there are high rates of non-response in some critical questions, which again are unusual in seeing the data for me, and suggest very strongly that it's really a lack of I'm just not sure. And that's what we're working with. So I hope that, again, I hope the data are valuable, and we're always available for questions about those. So Lise, you want to move us on?
Sure, absolutely. Karen, thank you. And I think we'll certainly recap some points at the end. You know, I think that knowing what the local mindset is, and also not projecting our own concerns on our consumers, I think is some of the key things there. So Amy, why don't you, now we know what's in the minds of some of our consumers, talk to us all about marketing strategies and how to reach them.
Great. Hey, everyone. So I remember back in March, doing a webinar that was, let's all take a deep breath and talk about what this COVID thing is and what we do now. So I'm going to repeat that. Let's all take a deep breath. And wow, how far we've come. I'm going to advance the slide.
Is it advancing? Gotta love technology as much as you practice, right?
That's right. So live in the hierarchy. So marketing strategy and messaging, they've always gone hand in hand, right? But today I'm going to dive into why and how your marketing and messaging looks different this year after 2021. So Maslow's hierarchy shows us that as our needs and desires are met, we're able to be motivated and reach for more. So as marketers, we want our product to fulfill and solve a problem better than anybody else's. So how can we use these two statements as we market to seniors? Picture that living in your retirement community is the top of the pyramid for your prospects. This is where we position your community, and by understanding how the prospects get there and how to position your community to meet unfulfilled needs on the way to the self-actualization, the top of that pyramid, is going to be key to everyone's success this year. All right, slide, please. So COVID just kind of rocked everybody's pyramid, right? It also got people to thinking, and this is why the marketing that you do over the next year needs to be adapted to reflect what just happened and how profoundly affected we all were, and by the events of 2020, including our prospects. So those that are able to adapt to this change by recognizing where our prospects are now absolutely have the opportunity for great success in 2021 and beyond if we get this right. So how do we get our marketing there for 2021? Meet our prospects where they are. Lisa just referenced that. Just let me say that again. Meet our prospects where they are. Anticipate, see the big picture, break it down into campaign cycles to match what our prospects are feeling and thinking as they navigate the current COVID situation, as vaccines are distributed and post-COVID starts to evolve. So there's going to be a lot of feelings, and people are going to be receiving information differently. So you have to keep that in mind, and it's very different. COVID's ignited intense emotions and reactions. So our marketing in this situation needs to be sensitive, emotional, precise, and most of all, timely. So we got to get to meeting people where they are on that hierarchy. All right, Lisa. So let's talk about what I've done here. The next 3 slides, you're going to see me take you through 2021 in 4-month chunks, because I'm suggesting that this is how you can look at organizing a campaign so that you can reach your prospects now and continue to do so throughout the year as the situation changes with COVID and everything else that goes on in our market. So January through April, right now, prospects, they're feeling, they've got some anticipation, a little bit of relief because there's a vaccine out there. They're still a little bit cautious, hopeful, and probably a little bit tired, like we all are. So where can your community come in on that? Well, you can help reestablish the safety and the health and the security. So if you look at the pyramid, we're back down toward the bottom of it, and that's what people are looking for right now. How do you do that? You tell the story, show the way that your community has adapted. Talk about the swiftness with which you took action and how you did what you did during COVID and came out on the other side, and continue to pay attention to that. So a couple of things that you might try with direct mail. People right now still seeking information, and they want to receive it. They don't want to be sold to right now. They want facts and figures, and they're sitting in their homes still wishing they could get out a lot. So they're reading. So this is a good time to send out direct mail that may be a little more copy heavy than we might typically do, but just making sure it's the information they want to hear. Social media, show your real residents with life happening, normalcy going on with mask. it's time to normalize the mask. So it's no big deal if you see your prospects, if you have a picture on your website, somebody's wearing a mask, that's just life as normal moving on here. Digital, use your digital campaign. I'm going to say this throughout these slides, but use your digital campaign and adapt, because it's so easy to do that with digital, to the messages that you're sending out as you go. So as we change what we're saying and sending to people, make sure that your digital backs that up and is so that they're hearing it from yet another angle. And we're able to change that with digital so quickly with the messaging. So that really can make a big difference. And then content marketing, you have a chance in your blogs and your longer reads. You really have a chance to put some information out there that your prospects are craving and want to hear, and be able to take your time and tell the story the way you want to tell it. All right, Lisa, then we go to May to August. So what's happening there? So we've just been through the first quarter of the year. May to August, prospects are feeling optimistic and resilient and energized, and they have strength. And why is that? Because we've had the vaccine out for a while. Probably most of our communities have had most of their residents vaccinated at this point, and other people in your communities are getting it. So the optimism's there. The resiliency is there. So what do you do? So this is where it's time to introduce the mid-pyramid. The belonging, the socialization. So we've reestablished some of the safety and the belonging needs. So now let's use your community as an outlet for that, for the socialization, to bring people back into it, provide social opportunities, connections, and a reason to plan. Just kind of put that back into people's life. You can be seen as that person who makes that available to them. And then your story at this point in time, tell the good news stories. Tell them left and right all over the place about your good news stories and your vaccine successes. At this point in time, people want to hear the good news. Now, we're not expanding on it and making anything other than it is. Be truthful, be transparent, but do not be afraid to share the good news. And what that looks like with, let's say, direct mail, you want to help them envision a future. So they're coming out of this a little bit more, people are ready to plan again. So throw your messaging and your images to reflect that. Social media, again, this is a good chance to show the lighthearted side. So many of you have done such a great job throughout COVID, and seeing people on your website doing fun things from their balconies with bands down in the courtyard and masks and everything. So time to bring that back. Let's be fun. Let's show them that life has moved on. Digital, keep that updated. And then with your content marketing, this is a really good time to tell real resident stories that don't focus on COVID. So it's been COVID for so long at this point in time. Go back to some of the human interest stories, tell some stories about some of your residents that have interesting backgrounds. Just make sure it's not all about COVID at this point. And then September through December, prospects are feeling aspirational, confident, moving on. They've taken stock of their life. Karen mentioned this, that they're resilient, they rebounded, they've been through stuff before and they've just done it again. So this is where you can build on your prospects' new confidence and their strong desire to move forward. Tell your story that allow your story to provide the backdrop for their next life adventure. Okay, so this is when we're getting back to some of the messaging that we do, where life at our community can make a difference. We'll take care of the minutiae. You come here and take on your next adventure. So again, we're not dwelling on COVID. We're moving on. So with your direct mail, you really want to hit the lifestyle, the feel-good stuff. Show them that. Social media, keep going with the human interest stories. And one thing I haven't said, but all year long, make sure you continue your virtual presence. That is something that changed with COVID, but it's here to stay. It's going to be happening in addition to any other marketing you're doing. And it's a great opportunity for all of us. And then finally, to summarize all this and to kind of meet your takeaway here, plan the entire year so that your messaging flows kind of as I described through the various stages of the pyramid and what people might be feeling. I put this out there in 4-month campaign waves, because really, if your audience is somewhere else, as Karen said, a lot of this is very localized. So if your audience is in a different place in Texas than it might be in West Virginia, then you could start in a different place in this campaign. Start the second wave or the third wave. If there's a delay, something happens, God forbid there's a pandemic or something, you can always go back. So if you're making progress and we're doing really great, but we hit August and something stumbles and you need to move back to help your prospects regain some confidence and then bring them back forward, don't be afraid to do that. That's how this is set up. Very simple to pivot and do it. Understand your audience, be flexible, meet them where they are, and just know that it's a flexible plan, that whatever stage you're in and your audience is in, you can adapt to it. And all this will help you follow your prospects to that self-actualization in your community.
Amy, thanks. And before we move on to the next stage, I think that a key, thing that I think will play into what Jim is going to share with us is that aspect of, be proactive, plan out, but make sure that you have the flexibility built in that you can pivot depending on what external factors get thrown at you, but being able to confidently reach out to your prospects and know your message, I think is going to be very, very key. So with that, Jim, let me turn it over to you, and feel free to let me know if you want to advance. I'll try to anticipate.
All right, thanks, Lisa. As we've been talking, and as you all know, COVID has changed everything, but there seems to be a light out there. But people are still fearful. The pool of prospects and leads is smaller because of those fears. Plus, there's an influx of in-home products and adaptive technologies to help and give more reason for people to remain in their home. I mean, there's so much we can't control, but you can take advantage of the things that you can control, and help make your community become the community of choice. So where do you start? Slide. Abandon the sea of sameness. Yes, you have a great dining program, a state-of-the-art fitness center with a vibrant, maintenance-free lifestyle that gives residents the opportunity to do all the things they love to do, not have to do. That's great. It's wonderful. And there is a place and time for those. You can't abandon that. And of course, your residents are extremely friendly. And I don't doubt that. I have never talked to a community where the residents aren't extremely friendly. But like I said, there's a time and place for all that. But chances are the community down the street is saying the exact same thing. And that means that type of soul messaging becomes very generic. It becomes a commodity. So now more than ever, you need to get away from that generic messaging, define who you really are, and elevate and focus on what really truly separates you from the other communities in ways that they can't even explain. Many of these things are not tangible. Most of it's perception, and perception is what you are. It's your brand. You got to remember that. A brand is not a dining program or a saltwater pool. It's a feeling that carves a place in the heart and the mind of the consumer. It's what separates you. It's a benefit that no one else can offer. And basically, it's your promise to the prospect. Slide. Morton salt, table salt, sodium chloride. Table salt is table salt. There's basically no difference between one table salt and the next table salt. Okay, you may say iodized and uniodized, but they're still the exact same product. But people are willing to pay 50 to 70% more for Morton salt. It's the #1 in the world. Why? It's that girl with the umbrella. People know her, they trust her, and they believe in her. And even though they're paying 70% more, they're doing it because they believe they're doing the right thing, because it's better for you. That's the power of perception. So imagine when it comes to a major purchase like a life plan community, perception is everything. So
Am I anticipating too fast, Jim?
yeah, that's okay. That's okay. That's the way these things happen. Now, perception also works the other way. It may be negative or just a big lack of understanding. And in that case, you can turn it around. Case in point, 1980s Rolling Stone magazine. Ad revenue was hurting big time because major advertisers had the perception that the readers were merely aging hippies driving VW microbuses, burning incense in the ashtray on the way to a Grateful Dead concert. They had no money except for Grateful Dead tickets. But in reality, a huge portion of the readership were from educated, card-carrying capitalists that drove BMWs with a lot of disposable income, buying major brands. So in 1985, Rolling Stone read, you can go ahead here, a very simple campaign based around 2 words and 2 images, perception, reality. The left is what everybody believed, the right is what reality was. You can go to the next slide too. Perception and reality. You can think of these as 2 different types of residents. The campaign ran for 10 years. 10 years, and in the first year alone, their ad revenue went up 47%. That's the power of perception, if you turn it around. So if the perception doesn't match reality, you're fighting an uphill battle. So don't knock people over the head with buzzwords and generic messaging. Share information that connects to their heart, to their mind, that gives them an emotional reason to separate you from the community down the street. Give them what informs the buying decision. If someone is comparing you to the community down the street, what is it about you that makes them choose you? If there's nothing to differentiate, you're selling the commodity, and nobody really wants a commodity unless you're investing in hog futures or the price of wheat. So your brand is not colors and a logo. It's everything about you. It's your reputation, your attitude, your communication style, what's going on with word of mouth. That's what differentiates you. It's the sum of everything you do, and that's what shapes perception. So I was talking to a resident a few weeks ago. We do a lot of resident interviews, and a woman shared a story on how she was touring a different community, and the person leading the tour never smiled. So not even halfway through the tour, she said, "I'm not moving here. I can't move here." And who knows, the person giving the tour just may have had a horrible day. Who knows what was going on? But that little perception of this one person didn't smile swayed her attitude. So when it comes to your direct mail, your video, your websites, and even your community itself, how people are greeted at the front gate, how salespeople talk to their prospects, it all shapes perception, and it's extremely important. But here's a couple things you can capitalize on now: the resident experience, connection, and personalities. Your residents are your believers and your advocates, and they should be, and they probably are, a major face of your community. When we do these interviews, there's one question I always like to ask. And that is, what is it about the community that sealed the deal for you, that you knew it was the one for you? The 2 most common answers are: 1, it was a gift to our children, and that usually comes later. But the second, and the one you hear all the time, is everyone is so friendly. But when you probe deeper, when you ask the right questions, it's not so much that they were just friendly, it was connection, it was belonging, it was being with people that are birds of a feather, and it's the everyday experience. Connection, common interest, and life experience. People want to be with their crowd, with their tribe. It's basic human instinct. It's belonging. So next slide. Some of the things we're doing right now is really capitalizing upon the experience. This is for a community in Charlton, Massachusetts, called the Overlook. And we really focus on, of course, amenities, but we also talk a great deal about the experience and the residents. You can go to the next slide. This is a feature on Lisa Soaps. She is a retired police officer. She's very involved in the community, and in fact, she retired as a police captain. She's from Lowell, Massachusetts. We mentioned that, and it's important to mention those little things like that, because Lowell starts to open a door for somebody. Oh, I have relatives in Lowell. I used to live in Lowell. My sister lives in Lowell. And mentioning her career and a little bit about it forms another connection. It shows, in her case, she has drive, perseverance, public service. She's doing things that she believes are important for others, and people begin to connect with that. If you don't connect with her, next slide, we have George Dragons. great name, Steve Dragon, excuse me. This guy loves brewing beer, and he's been doing it for 40 years. So the Overlook set up a brewing system for him, a microbrewery. And now he's not just brewing beer, his passion, his love for himself. He started a club called the Brew Crew, and they have all this 15, 20 members, and they do everything from grinding the grain to bottling. The beer's called Senior Moments too, which I think is kind of brilliant. But suddenly you're drawing people in, and you're making connections. I don't have a slide for this next example because it's something we're working on now. We're working on a website for a community in Massachusetts, in Concord, called Newbury Court. Though it's in Massachusetts, it's a totally different lifestyle. It's a totally different geographic area, somewhat close together, but it's a different way of life. It's not so much, though they love to have fun, it's a different kind of fun. This place is filled with MIT professors, there's writers, there's some creative directors there, there's doctors, there's engineers, there's people involved heavily in activism. And they're very culturally driven, not just only in inclusivity but also in the cultural arts. They have 5 Steinway grand pianos, 5. And their activities director is not an activities director. They don't have activities. This isn't a bingo and sing-along crowd. They have a program director. She actually has her PhD in history and worked for the Smithsonian. So it's about the symphony, it's about art openings, it's about giving back. They started a pottery studio, and they had this yearly fundraiser where they make soup bowls, and they auction them off, and the proceeds go to charity. So we have to capture their experience while we're capturing someone else. It's like spelling out who you really are. It's personality. So it's connection. So share your story, paint the picture, tell who you really are, and bring it to life with spirit and emotion, because people are connecting on an emotional level. So I'll leave you with 2 things. And one is, you can't be all things to all people, but you can be the right things to the right people. And finally, because at the end of the day, people won't remember what you said or did. They will remember how you made them feel. Think about that, how they feel. So with that, I'm turning it back over to Lisa. So thank you for the rambling.
Thank you, and great job. And I absolutely love this quote. And I think this is such a great segue into our final section here that Joan's going to talk about with sales strategies, because we can reach out to people, we can take the right marketing messages, we can take that compelling emotional feel, but as we all know, marketing in and of itself is not going to make the sales and the move-ins. Sales is such an integral part of that, to the point where we at Levin Company, we refer to it as smarketing, the blend of sales and marketing. So with that, Joan, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we might still be having some slide advancement issues. So please let me know if I don't anticipate properly.
Okay, I'll give it a try. Thank you, Lisa. Yes, we're going to talk about sales strategy, and I'll let everybody know right up front that we're going to talk about basics. And I'm clicking away, and I'll try it one more time.
All right, now,
Lisa,
okay,
you're going to have to help me.
Okay,
And you'll click again.
there we go.
Everybody, I bet some of you feel like this. Amy had a crazy looking slide, and so do I. What this is what somebody said to me last summer, one of the sales counselors, and I bet some of you are feeling like this. That's how she felt. She's feeling better. I want to report that. And what we're going to talk about is what she did about it, how she got control, because something that Jim said really resonates with me. You can't control everything. And so it's really important that you control what you can. And that's what she did. So next slide, please. If you would click again, Lisa, what we're going to talk about are best practices, but with a twist. It's time for a sales mindset reset. We have had to reset over and over, and Amy's slide shows us how to do it this year in terms of marketing, but in terms of sales, how do we think about everything that we just learned? And how do we think about what we think we know? We have to have a mindset reset to do that. And we have to also reestablish trust. All year we've been told we have to have empathy. Well, how do you get empathy, and what the heck is it anyway? How do you know when you get it? So we're going to take a look at how that happens. And then finally, we're going to have a few key takeaways. Very nice. Thank you. Next slide. So today's reality, we're in constant change. We can think two ways. We can think like an expert or like a beginner. So if Lisa will click us through a few times, there are perils to being an expert. Let's talk about that for a second. An expert tends to stop being curious. An expert tends to hesitate asking for advice. And that means they don't have new challenges and they stop learning. That's sad. And we're all experts. And in the last year, we're pretty clear that we may have frozen and done some of those things. It's okay. Now we're looking at, what does it mean to be a beginner? Well, beginners tend to make time to learn. They are focused and attentive. Beginners tend to ask for a lot of help. And finally, they're willing to try. That's wonderful. And that's because they have what's called a growth mindset. And this mindset is what we know helps us get through challenging times. And we've all done it this past year. The thing is, we've done it perhaps sometimes unintentionally. And we want to figure out, how can we do it so that it's intentional? Next slide, please. This is not new. This is something that has been around for a long time, and some people call it beginner's mind, and it's an attitude. And folks, this is why it's so hard, because it means we have to let go of what we think we know about what we think we know. And it's hard to do because it is so personal to us. Here's a definition of it. Next click, please. It is the fact that in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, whereas sadly in the expert's mind, there are few. And a Zen Buddhist monk said this. Suzuki was born before right around the beginning of the last century, and his studies were in philosophies that went back thousands of years. So call it whatever you want. The fact is, it's not new. And the fact is, we all do it a little bit, but let's look at what it looks like if we do it intentionally. Here are some examples. Click one. I can't do virtual presentations. Well, what if we thought this instead? Click, please. I meet my friends virtually. Why the heck can't I do it? It can't be that different. Next example. I don't know what to say to anyone. Well, in fact, what if I start over? What if I ask the right questions out of the gate? What if I reconnect? Next example. I hate my CRM. Maybe I need to think of it this way. Have I put my notes in properly? Have I done them in a timely, consistent way? Are they helping me plan and think? My prospect won't list her house. How about, as Karen taught us, I need to do some research. I need to look at the local real estate, because what I know is the prices are up, the interest rates are down, average days on market is shorter than ever. And in fact, I know that, reading my paper, people are getting multiple offers in excess of the asking price. I'll do a one-pager and get it to my prospect and walk her through the facts and see what she thinks then. And finally, I have a client that is overwhelmed. He's afraid and overwhelmed. How about this? Instead of saying, I get crickets when I call him, I'll call again and tell him I'm overwhelmed too. And we'll talk about what worries us the most. That's the difference between having the mindset of an expert and stopping our forward momentum versus having a new mindset that is a growth mindset that lets me move on to another step. Next, please. It's hard, but that means there are great opportunities out there. And what it looks like if we agree to be an expert with a beginner's mind or a growth mindset, it looks like this. It means we'll still make mistakes, but we'll continue to grow and try new things. That's imperative this year. We'll catch our errors. We'll do a lot of A/B testing, either in sales or in marketing, but we'll use those mistakes as a form of feedback and we'll pivot. And next, what we'll find is that we're fluid. We have to be. We'll correct course and we'll learn from what we've done. That means All of this growth mindset business is an iterative process. It gets smarter as it goes. And in terms of process, it is important to respect the process. It's another best practice. It's a standard that deserves our respect. But we have to look at it as a path. Think of our process as a path. If we step off the path, will we still get where we want to go? If so, perhaps we need to do that. But we always have to agree that it will get us where we want to go. The next situation, we go back to the process and decide if we step off again. All of this is forward thinking. All of this is done because we believe in what we're doing, believe in what's possible. And frankly, that's because what we're doing has inherent integrity. Nothing about our communities and what we offer has changed. What has changed is the world, and that's why we need a mindset reset. So let's look at how that works. Here's how you do it. Start with little things. Count every advance. Count every conversation, not just the volume of contacts you attempt. Count the littlest things, which are the advances and continuances. This is important because it helps us recognize progress. We need that today because remember, what we're talking about today is how to have confidence in the tools that we have. And one of the ways you do is compartmentalize them into little tiny steps, and they show your progress. They show your momentum, and you build on that, and that changes your KPIs. Next click, please. Challenge assumptions and explore possibilities. When you see the KPIs, think about what they mean. When you see the face sheet in the database, think about what it means. Don't prejudge results and don't prejudge any reason that you think something might work or not. Employ not just the tactics of discovery and inquiry, but the spirit of it. Reach out not just to your prospects properly, which we're going to talk about in a second, but reach out to your team. Any next step should be relevant, not to you, but to your prospect. When you say what the next step is, you should be able to answer this question: why is this relevant to my prospect? And next, we want to make sure that we respect our experience. Being in beginner's mind or having a growth mindset doesn't mean we don't respect all of the experience we have. It means we apply our experience in a new way. You could ask yourself, knowing what I do, what would I do if I were just starting out? And why would I do it that way? And finally, act on the data. It is the data that is not attached to anything but the facts. The narrative matters, but it's often predicated on situational information that no longer applies. So look at it and see if the narrative makes sense with the data, but if it doesn't, apply and act on the data. Next slide, please. So how do we reestablish trust? Well, it's really quite simple and it's very complicated and it takes practice. We have to listen. Click, please. When we listen, what happens is we don't work on solving someone's problem. And that's what we typically do when we speak with our clients. Lisa, if you would go ahead and go forward to complete this slide. What is happening, folks, when we have a problem focus, we're trying to tell people we know what it is they need, when in fact, we don't really have any understanding because we haven't really asked them, how do you want to live and what would make you happy? Instead, if we have a motivation focus, we're fully concentrating on the prospect. We're listening to their words and observing their emotion. And we're reflecting what we hear back at them in our response. When that happens, we have clear and importantly, shared understanding of what it means. Forward, please. This is important, folks. Listening is the best way to understand each other. And Bryant McGill has billions of people around the planet that he connects with through his books and through his social media. I think he's right. We have to learn to listen to us. So let's finish by looking at what listening means. If you would click forward, Lisa, hearing is passive. Hearing is involuntary. Unless you have hearing loss, it just happens. Whereas listening is active. Listening is intentional. That means active listening is kind of listening to the second power. Next slide, please. Now let's click a little bit slow through this. We start with body language. We listen to what they say, their cadence, their tone, their intent, their body language, and click, we mirror and model them. The next thing we do is paraphrase their responses by asking open-ended questions, listening, paraphrasing, even to the point of saying the last 2 or 3 words they say. What does that mean? It means we set ourselves aside. We're not telling them what we're thinking while they talk. We're listening to them while they talk, and we say back to them what we heard. And then what happens is we summarize for each other and reflect on what was said. What does this mean? It means we set ourselves aside. We had no judgment. We're not there to solve their problem. We're not there yet to sell to them. We're there to listen. This is important because at this point, you have clarity. That means I heard you and you heard me. And guess what, folks? That's when you have empathy. Empathy means I get you and I know that you get me. And we both know that. That's the powerful thing. You cannot ask somebody for a next step, whether it's a call or an appointment or a brochure to be mailed or a check, without empathy being established, where you both know, you both understand what is important. And because you can ask for that, it means you've done this, you've established trust. And the truth is, click please, trust is what matters, and it's with active listening that you get it. It's the only thing that matters. It's the coin of the realm. So what did we learn? Go ahead, next slide. We need to be intentional about the basics. We need a mindset reset, and we need to learn to listen. These are basics. They're free, and they can be practiced and get better. And why do we do that? Let's look at what happens when we do it as we finish. If you'll finish clicking, Lisa, we'll talk about that. Your discovery changes. It becomes relevant to the prospect. All of your projections and tactics change, and now you're counting advances, which are very, very important. And finally, that means your CRM is smarter, and it becomes a tool and not your enemy, and you can use all of those new metrics for conversion information that matters. And because of that, you can act on data that you trust. It's credible and it's valid. Lastly, it gives you confidence. And I think that our old friend Dale Carnegie said it best. Action breeds confidence and courage. And I hope this gives you some confidence so that we can, I guess, go out there and get busy. Lisa, you're a great clicker.
I'm getting good at reading your mind, Joan. So that was
That's a dangerous thing.
I did it well.
You.
So, absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm so excited that everyone here was able to share their insights. And I'm just going to close with just a few summary points before we get into the questions. So, you know, we've had a lot of body of information that we covered today. So hopefully these really capture some of the key points that our panelists covered. But the path to rebuilding Census this year, as Karen talked about, knowing what consumers are thinking at the local level is more important than ever. Not that that's a new thing, but it's definitely more important than ever. But don't assume. Find out through conversations, find out through surveys what is really in the minds of your particular audience. Consumers are concerned, but there's not a mass exodus. The key thing here is that your leads and your depositors, they need reinsurance. They need to, know that what you're offering is still there and that you're looking at new ways to do that. As Amy talked about, proactively plan out the year. Now is not the time to be reactionary and knee-jerk. Define those strategies, define those messages to meet your audience where they are. So plan ahead, but be flexible. You don't want to set it and forget it because we can't fully anticipate what is going to happen. We need to be able to adjust strategies to the stage that your prospects are in, even if that does mean taking a step back a stage if something surprises us going forward. As Jim talked about, 2020 really increased stay-at-home competitive pressure. Now more than ever, it's important to overcome that sea of sameness that he talked about. You want to go deeper than the general benefits. You really need to, take a moment to take stock of understanding who you really are, who are you for, And what are your prospects going to gain by moving to your community? You can't be and shouldn't try to be everything for everyone. So you really need to understand and communicate effectively your why. What is the why that people would come to your community? And as Joan was just talking about, you want to be intentional about the basics. We need to return to sales best practices. For those who remember, after the market downturn and the real estate bubble blew up way back in 2008, 2009, the field as a whole really recognized how important it is to get down to a disciplined sales process. And now it's really time to turn back to some of those basics with some new and different ways to do things. And so I love how Joan talks about that sales mindset reset. With constant change, everyone needs to look at everything as if they're learning it for the first time. And a big key part of this is to reestablish trust through those active listening things that Joan talked about. So hopefully that takes all that good information and sort of coalesces it. Certainly, we're going to now go into our Q&A aspect of the session here. And I unfortunately am having a little bit of control panel issues. So I am going to actually have to perhaps ask if maybe Amy, if you are able to see those from our GoToWebinar guru and could take over a little bit of moderating for me to be able to read those questions, if that's possible.
Sure. So we have the first question is for Karen. You say that the data suggests that healthcare is not the monster under the bed, quotations, and that people still appear to be interested in community. If that's the case, where do you see the greatest challenges for sales and marketing?
So I think that one of my concerns would be in delays. I think that it's not so much about the people who have already been committed. The data seem to suggest that there's fairly minimal fall away, particularly in people who have at least have a 10% deposit, selected a unit. That's pretty minimal. I think, and all of our data are leads who have had some contact. So they've always been able to delay anyway, right? If we ask them how soon would you want to move, it's often 3 years or 5 years and more. And so I think that at this moment, and I think we could probably boomerang back to the old days in a lot of ways, but the moment I think it's really about delays. And the second thing might be generating new leads for people who have really been set up with some preconceived notions. So I do think that a lot of the recommendations from my colleagues here today have a lot of good value for that group of people who we need to totally build trust. They haven't already had some familiarity. So the trust. And the second thing is that I think in addition to the trust is a sense of community, that people do look for their tribe. So that's probably another channel into the markets.
Great. Thanks, Karen. There's another question here for Jim. You talked about big brand names. How do we get our brand, maybe not to Morton Salt level, but known at least in our world of senior living?
Well, you can't, and you might as well just give up because nobody really wants to move to a nursing home anyways. No, I'm just kidding. But there's some truth to that. You need to be consistent with your messaging and separate you from your competition. And it needs to live up to that brand promise everywhere. You know, take word of mouth, for example. Word of mouth is huge. So when Jack tells Jill how great your place is, and she gets a direct mail invitation in the mail, or she goes to your website, if you do not live up to that perception of Jack's, you're really hurting yourself. And another case about word of mouth these days is Google reviews. I mean, they're huge. So make sure you have a program set to respond to reviews, because you may have 20 great reviews, but one bad review can really damage your brand. However, research shows if you respond in a timely manner with empathy, the right place, and do it correctly, you can actually improve your image. So it's just being true and consistent to what you really are and not what everyone else is.
Great, thanks, Jim. Let's see, great questions. Joan, You mentioned the small KPI. What are some important small KPIs that we should count in sales? What about significant KPIs?
Okay, very good. Significant, let's start with the end in sight. Significant KPIs are the obvious ones. Deposits, and backing away from there, appointments. What we have to remember is appointments look different today. They can be in person in some cases, often they're virtual. And I would suggest that we need to get serious about what we think about phone appointments. If we're having a phone call with someone and we're discussing things that we typically in the old days would have done across the table from each other in a conference room, we didn't just have a phone out or a phone in, we actually had a phone appointment. First of all, I suggest you put that in the database as a drop-down code in the system and call it a phone appointment. Just make sure everyone on the team understands the definition and uses it in exactly the same way. So you have phone appointments, virtual appointments, in-person appointments. These are one-on-one for one resident, and they're affected by the other contacts that we have. All of those contacts have become have often combined now into one big number. It used to be, as we know, that we would look at calls separately. We'll now look at calls and emails perhaps together, and that's okay. But I do suggest we break out still old-fashioned basics, call-outs and call-ins. But I also suggest we track conversations per call-in, conversations per call-out. Then what we can do is see, do our call-ins turn into those various kinds of appointments? And which of those call-in conversations turn into checks? The same thing. Do our call-outs perform better with appointments of any kind and with checks? What that tells us is new leads are behaving differently than the people in the database. So maybe the call outs to old leads actually get more conversations going that end up with checks. That's important. That means mind the database. But I want to go for one more second back to the idea of advances. We have to count the little things that mean something. If the call or contact that you had or appointment that you had means that something is different in a positive way after the contact than it was before, it's like a hinge turned a little bit. That's an advance. So if you had something positive, even a trust breakthrough, you had an advance. Certainly an appointment scheduled or a brochure mail or yeah, call me in a week. Those are advances. But learn to recognize the more subtle advances and count them. Get a Post-it note and count dashes and hashes on it, so your hashes are your advances. Those add up. Those become appointments. Those become checks. So they're the little KPIs I would count, and then I would count the big ones to see what is affected the most.
Thanks, Joan. Next question is for Amy or Lisa. How do you work around the visitation restrictions in communities to push forward advances?
That's a great question, Amy. Since you took over moderating, I'll maybe jump in and answer this question first. So working around the visitation issues, that's a really great question. And we're talking to a lot of communities about that. I think a couple key things is you need to make sure that operationally you have a very clear plan for how that is going to work, and that your sales counselors are very clear and are able to speak to it confidently. We know that communities are taking this very seriously and are putting very specific steps and processes in place. So if you're able to relay that confidence to your prospect, that is very key. So things like scheduled appointments, making sure that you're clear with them about here is the steps we're going to take. This is what we're doing when people come in. We're checking temperatures, we're sanitizing. we're only going to go and take a tour and see this, this, and this. So making sure that they know what is to come and that you're spacing those appointments. Those are going to be the ways that you're able to share that confidence with your prospect. What's interesting is that we have communities where people absolutely want to come to visit. So let's put in protocols to be able to enable them to do that, not create obstacles of our own doing. And the same thing we do, there are communities who are also doing smaller scale, properly socially distant events in some cases. And again, making sure that you have the logistics and the protocol in place and are able to communicate them in advance to the people who are coming, that is going to mean all the difference in the world. But don't assume that only having people come to the community is the only way you can advance a sale or make a sale. We really want to encourage people to look at and not assume that your prospects can't use platforms such as Zoom or FaceTime to be able to connect with you, to do virtual tours, to be able to have appointments in that way. So I'll pause and Amy, see if there's anything that you want to add.
Yeah, that's great. As Lisa said, once you have all that buttoned up, something I said before on a webinar, and I hope everybody's doing it, but think about how can you take your community experience to our prospects in their home and where they are. Because if they can't come on campus and if there are restrictions, we need to be able to replace that as best as we can. So get real creative on how you do that. And that can include all kinds of things that I don't have time to go into here today, but there's a lot of ways to get creative and reach your people if they can't make it into the community. All right, we have another question. Oh, sorry. We have another question. That says, this is for Jim, but good for everyone. So anybody can feel free to raise your hand and pipe in. When you talk about sea of sameness, can't that also apply for the current state of AL communities? What type of innovation is needed among assisted living in the future?
That's a good question. What type of innovation? I'll let somebody else jump in on this first way I touch on that one.
Yeah, I was gonna, while you're thinking about it a little bit, and Joan, you may have some thoughts too. You know, I think there's a couple of things of, yes, any of our higher levels of care have really been put under scrutiny, you know, from media, primarily nursing homes. But as we all know, a lot of the general public, they hear nursing home and they assume it applies to all levels of care, even independent living. I think that, you know, with assisted living, that, you know, we have been, you know, even before 2020, and that definitely has continued in 2020, that there is more competition. There are more focus on lifestyle aspects. There are more focus on what is going to be the experience for my loved one who is moving there. And so that same type of comment that Jim was making about saying, you know, what are those things that are unique and special? And it may not simply be about the programming and that lifestyle aspect, but what are the outcomes that you have? You know, when we're thinking about, you know, encouraging mobility, when we're thinking about encouraging independence, and this also extends into memory care as well. What are the things that you are doing programmatically that are setting you apart? And being able to use testimonials from residents and their family, just as we talk about with independent living, that speaks volumes when people see that you have people who are living there, who are satisfied, who are happy, who are living their best life, and they're doing it safely.
Yeah, I was going to jump in with the testimonial aspect because third-party endorsement is huge, especially on such a sensitive topic. And hearing from the adult child is major. Also, their blog content is extremely important in here, and not just content that's written all about you. Take it from a thought leadership approach where it's not just you, but it's other people too. And it's not about your food. It's not about, it's about caring and how caring is done, and not about your food and everything like that. All the amenities you offer. Take it from a thought leadership, be a leader, and people will turn to you.
Jim, I think it's good that you brought up the blog sorry, Jen, let me throw one thing out. I think it's good you brought up the blog content, because one of the key things right now is strip away the veneer. You know, this is not the time to be slick with your marketing messages, and blogs really provide an opportunity to be able to build a story. It's not just about a soundbite. And so it's something that can be as complex and nuanced as assisted living or memory care, to be able to you know, share those stories and share the things that you're doing, and do it in a way that's not just about, you know, a direct mail or an ad or a TV spot, but is really being able to start that conversation with people is key. So Joan, go ahead. I'm sorry to talk over you.
No, what you said relates to what I was thinking about, Lisa, when you mentioned transparency, or I wanted to mention transparency. You said taking off the veneer. And I think that's really important today. If we're going to reestablish trust, I think it's important that we recognize that, as we learned today from Jim, perception matters, and we aren't there to argue about it. We're there to affirm and appreciate what other people think, and then step back and ask if we can talk about it. It's not an interrogation, it's a two-way conversation, and it's very difficult with our assisted living families that are under a great deal of stress. This is where listening makes a huge difference, and we need to give them a chance to say what's on their mind and affirm and appreciate what we're hearing. Tell them that they're right to feel like they feel. Let them know with transparency, in a genuine way, from the top down, from the executive director, the administrator, the director of nursing, rehab, everybody, to the admissions director and the social service team. Pardon me. Let the message be the same across the board, so that whenever anybody speaks, they're speaking from that transparent point of view about the reality in the community. Don't be afraid to talk about the challenges you had, but talk about what you did about them and how you went forward, and why it matters to have people around that support you, which is something that Karen found in her research, that people wanted to know who was providing care, what was the philosophy of that care, and being connected to those people mattered. And I firmly believe that families want that for their loved ones, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for them to do it at home.
Just quickly, because we have another question, that looks like a good question, but looking at your technologies, one of the biggest issues that emerged that I think is going to stick around for a little while, even in this current pandemic, is you locked everybody down and I couldn't see my family. So I think assisted living is particularly critical. So with technologies you have that you can safely support individual assisted living residents in their units with the technology to engage with their families, and or strategies on site. We saw all kinds of interesting things created for people to be able to visit with each other. So I think that is going to long be one of those really outstanding, terrifying things. You limited my family and myself from each other. The situation limited it. So I think that's one of those places to pay some attention, and the use of technology can go a long way.
And I just want, I know we've got several more questions, but I think, Karen, what you brought up is a really good point. And you know, when I talked before about confidence, having a working with, you know, facilities and resident services and dining and everybody to really put out, this is what our move-in orientation is going to be. And to be able to have something very clear so that when you know, our potential residents or their families say, well, you know, we're not going to be able to see them, or they're going to have to quarantine, how are you really going to make this a positive experience for me or for my loved one? And to be able to say, I'm glad you asked that question, and I'm so excited because here's the program that we have in order to make them feel welcome, feel included, you know, feel that they are becoming part of this community and have that support, even if we may have to have a little distance for a time. That's going to go a long way to really creating that trust and establishing a value.
This next one's good, Amy.
Thanks, Karen, stealing my lines. This is good, and it's for all of our panelists, but Joan, I'm going to ask you to answer first because you and I have had a lot of conversations about this. So the question is, would anyone cite name one thing COVID has changed that is negative and is never going away, and 2, one thing that is positive and never going away because of COVID?
Wow. I think the one thing that has changed that is negative and won't go away is the sense that we're not in control of everything, whether it's us as professionals today, that all of us that are together, both on our panel and in our audience, or the families or our teams in our communities. We know we're not in control, and that's negative, and I don't think that's going to change. The thing that's positive that's not going to change is we know we can do something. We know that we can pull together, and that's the biggest positive for me that I think that we can take away. We can do something. We just have to do it together and be intentional and be transparent and genuine.
Karen.
Thanks, Aim. So I think I'll go back to that issue of you controlling my life, the control Joan's mentioning and the visitation. That's one of the things that came out, not in massive ways, but it certainly was in comments that were very strong. Why? I don't want to go somewhere that all of a sudden you're going to control me. And I'm not sure that's going to go away easily. I think that'll sit as a concern in people's minds because, again, there's been a lot of video clips in the media and things like that. But I do think it's a great opportunity to engage with residents and new people as they move and say, okay, how do we, just to be preventive, we don't think there's going to be pandemics forever. It's a great opportunity to problem solve. I think the thing that's changed forever that we really see in that first slide, and that first slide is from the COVID surveys, is that the use of technology did indeed really jump. And it's not just these teleconferencing calls. That did jump. Telemedicine if you go back, look at those data when you're able to when they're sent out. But the use of telemedicine, that's not going away again. Medicare is now reimbursing for it. It's convenient for people, and COVID or no COVID, if you live in a place with a ton of traffic or you just don't want to go out. And other technologies, the virtual museum tours, virtual education, virtual fitness. You know what? There are comments about, I don't have to get the rollers out of my hair. Yes, people seem to still do that. I don't have to get out of my pajama. And mostly people can't see when I'm being klutzy. So I think those tools that we've talked about them being on the horizon forever, this pushed the use and moved the needle on the meter. So there's opportunities there. And I don't want to belabor this, but the museum tours and fitness is a place that a whole bunch of people said, I'm not using it, I want to use it. So if you look at those numbers and you see in the 30% of people who aren't but want to, that's opportunity. So thanks for letting me do that. I like that question.
I'll chime in a couple things. One of the negatives is the effect on mental wellness. I mean, people have been living in isolation. It's caused depression, a lot of mental problems. I'm not saying that's never going to go away, but it's going to take a while for it to go away. So the importance of not just wellness programs, but focusing on the mental wellness is very important. One of the positives, I was going to say technology, but it's also, we're going to be prepared for things ahead and doing things differently. We know now we are a very reactionary country as a whole. It takes something bad before things good happen. Everyone knew that if a major hurricane hit New Orleans, it was going to be trouble. And look at Katrina. But since then, now we're building the dams and the levees that we need. I mean, we react. So we are going to be more prepared if something like this comes along, or if it's going to take a long time to go away.
Great. Lisa, if you have anything to add, otherwise, I did have a comment about it, but I don't want to.
Go ahead. Everybody's kind of said a lot of the same things I would, but yeah, why don't you go ahead and then we can take another question if there are more.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so that I kind of dovetail on what Joan was saying, is that something that's never going to go away is that we are just reminded again that we don't necessarily have ultimate control all the time, and things will happen. And the good part of that is, and it goes right to the people that we work with and what we're trying to accomplish with our communities and helping seniors every day, is it reminds us that planning is so important. So anything that happens, when you have a plan, panic doesn't set in, and you just enact the plan. And so that's what we can do for all of our prospects as communities, is help them make that plan. The plan's right for them. All right, and I'm looking at the clock. It looks like this, I'm going to make this our last question. How often do you recommend a personal touch, call or email, with prospects who are 5 or more years away from wanting to move into a community? So they're 5 years out. How often should we talk to them or touch them or reach out?
Joan, do you want to take that question?
Sure. My sense is these are active leads that had an interest and they're long-term. And I would look at making sure they're in the lists, the in-house lists that go out for a variety of purposes, whether they're emails or blogs or direct mail campaigns, but occasionally, and Amy, you would be able to weigh in on this, I think it's really important that they get messaging that's specific to them about what Amy just touched on, about the idea of planning. And so we stay in touch with them in a general way, but then carve them out for the special case that they are and send them some specific messages that are relevant to them. And I think that's really important. When you know the person in personally, when you actually have a relationship with them, I think that it's a tactical plan and a strategic plan that should be very specific to them, and much as you would almost, not quite, but with a friend that you don't see very often. You think of them as, I know they'd be interested in this, I'll reach out and share this with them. It doesn't have anything to do with selling, it has to do with connecting, and that's how we build our relationships. Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Joan. And as I was reading the question, I was thinking, how often do you recommend a personal touch? Which is very different. When we're doing this right, we have our digital stuff set up, and they're getting e-newsletters, they're getting our direct mails, they're being invited to events. But I think the key in this question is that personal touch. You're 5 years out. I think the answer is you have to know the person, and based on them, you might say to them, you know, we're going to be talking for the next 5 years. I'm going to check in with you every once in a while, and kind of get a feel with that for that, and ask them. But as Joan said, the most important thing you can do is find a connection with that person, and don't underestimate the very basic things that sometimes we all forget. It's their birthday. Make sure you hit them up with a birthday card in the mail. So things like that, you can't really time that very much. What you don't want to do is keep calling somebody once a week at 10 o'clock on Thursday, because that's not very genuine.
Right. Yeah, and I would just kind of add on to that, is that even though they've told you at some point that they're not making a move for 5 years, don't assume that that's never going to change. And, you know, a big part about lead nurturing and, you know, through marketing automation and marketing efforts, plus the proactive sales effort, is we shouldn't just say, okay, they'll move when they're ready to come to us. It is our responsibility to them, because they have expressed interest in learning more about your community, to make sure that they have all the facts. Because this could absolutely be one of the best decisions that they can make, and you being able to help them see that and potentially take the opportunity of moving into the community while they still have plenty of time to enjoy everything that you have to offer. That's a gift, that's a service that you can offer them. So, you know, don't assume just because they have said they're very far out to kind of write them off and not keep tabs on them.
And I'm going to close this from the researcher's perspective. So we often talk about communications are, but that's the opportunity to periodically, as you have questions in developing programs, in designing new things, in doing things differently, why not ask? Those are guys who are out in the future for you, and they can help be your crystal ball. They can make you a prophet in your own land by asking them. And one of the things that of 40 years of research in this field is people prefer to be asked and not told. So I think do contact through asking.
That's a great point. Well, we are right at the end of our planned time, so hopefully we got to everyone's questions, but certainly if we haven't or you think of some others, please reach out to us. And as we wrap up, we'll have the recording that we will be sharing out to everyone who participated today. So I want to thank all of our panelists for all of your great insights, and I want to thank all of the participants who took time out of their busy days to join us today. Hopefully we provided some value, and we look forward to speaking with you again for our next webinar. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.